All right. Oh, where am I? There I am. Okay. Sorry about that. I really need to get those captions entered into this screen. Um, but for now, whatever. Here we are once again, and we're going to do another occult reading. Well, Forbidden History for now. We'll try to get through this book so that we can move on to something else. I put out the poll yesterday for Atlantis, Jesus and Mary, the Masons / Templars, and I can't remember what the fourth one was. But anyway, I got one vote almost immediately, and it was for Atlantis. So we'll see. It's going to be up for 4 days, and then we will narrow it from there. If it ends up going for Atlantis, great, fine. I have lots of books on and material on Atlantis, so we'll go forward with that. The other one was to continue the Forbidden series, which would be either Forbidden Religion or Forbidden Science. So that was the fourth choice. Anyway, here we are. Article number 36, The Obelisk Quarry Mystery. Do Egyptologists really know how these monuments were created? By Christopher Dunn. Like I said a couple sessions ago, we're going to be sick of this guy by the time we get done with this book, because almost the last half of the book is all just his articles. Anyway, here we go. Maybe not a half. In my articles and book, I have injected a distinct bias when I have viewed ancient Egyptian artifacts. In this article, I will explain where my bias came from, and I will answer the following questions. Isn't it possible to create all these wonderful artifacts in ancient Egypt with primitive tools? Because there are volumes of work that describe how these tools were capable of such work, we don't need to resort to fantastic inventions that don't exist in the archaeological records. So why do you? So those are the questions he's answering. All right. My biased opinion of the level of technology used by the ancient Egyptians comes from many years of work in manufacturing. For 6 years, over 12,480 hours, I operated hand tools and machine tools of many varieties, both large and small, in the production of artifacts that were crafted to engineering specifications. At the end of this 6 years, I had completed my apprenticeship and was presented with journeyman documents to benefit from as I saw fit. The opportunities that followed spanned more than 3 decades. During this time, I must admit that my bias was further reinforced by exposure to the environment in which I had chosen to make a living. The effect this environment has had on my brain, I fear, is irreversible. By the time I had been rescued and promoted to the sterile confines of a senior manager's office, more than 62,400 hours of environmental exposure in engineering and manufacturing had left deeply embedded scars in my critical thinking skills regarding how things are made. These scars describe a path of struggle, the struggle to convert ideas into physical reality. The struggle is to sketch an idea onto paper and then proceed to pour, cut, shape, and mold that idea with precision into a functioning device. The struggle is to employ every intellectual and physical tool available within the disciplines of science, engineering, manufacturing, and metrology that embrace function, form, and precision. However, these scars also describe a path of disappointment when ideas do not work, and a path of elation when, having learned from mistakes, there is success. Associated with both, the higher forces of humility etch a little deeper. Perhaps I was too hasty in exclaiming space-age precision after discovering an accuracy of 2/10,000ths of an inch on the inside of a large prehistoric granite box. Perhaps the lathe marks were not really lathe marks. Perhaps I am overconfident when I look at tool marks on an artifact and can identify the tool that made them. I have considered that a part of my bias, could be related to a time in my career when I had to think like an American rather than an Englishman. But then I don't remember any drastic changes there except the revelation that engineers are forced to think in similar ways regardless of what country they are in. That's the price of living in a physical world with natural laws. Of course, the other environmental effect of living in a culture different from the one in which you spent your formative years is the stripping away of preconceived chauvinistic views of your natural culture as it relates to other cultures. This leads to a greater tolerance and acceptance of the views of others. The reason I am telling you this is to give you some idea of the mistake I made in presenting my work. Much of what I had taken for granted when looking at artifacts in Egypt needed to be more fully explained. I realized that I had been putting the cart before the horse. In studying ancient Egyptian artifacts, I looked at the final product and wrote about the geometry and the precision. For the most part, I neglected to discuss all the methods that are required and by which these artifacts were created. To me, it seemed obvious that they were the product of technologies of which there is no surviving evidence. What I've been faced with, though, are arguments that cling to the notion that the use of primitive tools, such as stone hammers and pounders, copper chisels, and abrasive materials such as sand, is sufficient to explain the existence of all the stoneware created in ancient Egypt. It is argued that these tools, in the hands of a large, skillful workforce with plenty of time at its disposal, are capable of creating all of these artifacts. It is argued that the ancient Egyptians did not consider time in the same way we do. To the ancient Egyptians, a civilization that covered several millennia, A decade was but a drop in the ocean of time, a century a mere goblet. So when an Egyptologist is asked to explain how a particularly difficult to create object is made, the main ingredient is time, and lots of it. For a culture that spanned so many centuries, the ancient Egyptians were building for eternity. But their architecture and building materials, they were quite obviously concerned about the continuity of their Ka or spirit and the continuity of their civilization. It all sounds very logical and complete, and I found myself nodding my head in agreement. I cannot deny that handwork can produce many beautiful and precise objects in extremely difficult to work materials. Yet, even as I found myself agreeing, I still had a nagging concern that something was not quite right. There had to be more cogent arguments to which Orthodox Egyptologists would listen. It has become quite obvious that ringing my bell next to artifacts that are incredibly precise was falling on deaf ears. Excuse me. Sorry. Following the publication of my previous article entitled Precision, I engaged in some discussion on internet message boards. This is not the first time I have participated in such discussions, since I discovered these aerobic exercises for the fingers are as far back as 1995. My enthusiasm for such discourse has been tempered by the reality that in most cases, internet debates are time-wasting and futile. I have been advised to avoid them like the plague, mostly by those who are closest to me, my family, particularly my wife. Nevertheless, out of the masochistic exercise came some insight as to how I can redress my mistakes. What I noticed is that I found myself discussing my work with people who did not agree with my conclusions. Because they did not agree with my conclusions, they quickly adopted the findings of scholars who have published their own studies and who articulated conclusions that are more consistent with what is believed about the history of the ancient Egyptians. The foremost authority on ancient Egyptian stoneworking today is Dennis Stocks of Manchester University. Stocks's work effectively trumps any prior commentary on the subject and is invaluable in analyzing the techniques of the ancient stonemasons. Stocks's opinions on the subject carry more weight because they are based on experimental data gathered in Egypt using materials that are a part of the archaeological record. The opinions of Sir William Flinders Petrie in his book Pyramids and Temple of Giza, which was published in 1893, and Lucas and Harris in their Ancient Egyptian Materials and Industries are preempted by Stocks's field studies and considerable effort. The most recent work by Stocks was the Aswan project funded by Nova during the creation of its obelisk documentaries. For this reason, I will focus on the working of granite, for in the course of his credible and scientific research at Aswan, Stocks produced some hard data on material removal rates that enables us to perform a reasonably accurate time study. The analysis is quite simple and is used by estimating engineers in manufacturing to provide estimated costs for producing modern-day artifacts. That's a rough sentence. What follows are calculations based on Stocks's research on the amount of time necessary to quarry one granite obelisk. The time will not include the time necessary for pulling its 440-ton mass out of the quarry, nor do the calculations address the finishing of the block to its smooth, flat surface, or the numerous deeply etched incredible glyphs. Last, they do not take into account the time it would take to transport and erect the obelisk in front of Pylon V at Karnak, or Pylon 5, I guess. Um, we will start at the Aswan granite quarries, where we will select a suitable area for one stone, or for our stone. Wow. Okay. Based on the finished dimensions, the raw piece of stone will be tall. The method used by the ancient Egyptians to separate a large, important stone from the bedrock was to cut a channel all the way around the piece and then undercut it, leaving pillars supporting its weight. This hypothesis seems most reasonable and sensible. When looking at the unfinished obelisk at Aswan, we see that a trench was cut all around the obelisk, and if work had continued, an undercut would have been necessary to separate the granite from the bedrock. The channel has scoop-shaped quarry marks, which led the Egyptologist Dieter Arnold to claim that each worker sent to the granite was assigned an area of 75 centimeters wide and divided into working sections 60 centimeters long, the minimum space for a squatting or kneeling worker. This would be a somewhat cramped area, barely 2 feet by 2.5 feet wide, for a worker swinging a heavy stone ball, and considering that there would have needed to be a line of workers, each one equally aggressive in wielding his stone ball, the risk of injury does not go unnoticed. Nevertheless, for the sake of argument, I will use these figures in my calculations. Mark Lehner, in the Obelisk documentary, concurred that this method was probably the one used by the ancient Egyptians, and he even performed some experimental work himself. Based on the material removal rate information, therefore, a quick analysis of the time necessary to quarry an obelisk can be made, though we might believe that with a sufficient amount of labor, the time it takes to accomplish a given project could be reduced. This is not necessarily true. Within any project are constraints or bottlenecks. So while we may command a workforce of 1,000, a bottleneck will effectively reduce the number engaged in a given project significantly. The constraint in the obelisk quarrying project is the number of workers able to work on a 2 foot by 2.5 foot patch of granite. Okay, so there are a couple of pictures here I was going to go ahead and show. This one I skipped, but it's the obelisk at Karnak that he mentioned. Okay. And then on the next page is the obelisk that is in question, that is still there, that was never finished, at Aswan. Okay, and it says, left the unfinished obelisk of Aswan, right the tip of Aswan's unfinished obelisk. Okay, so back to it after a sip. All right, obviously this is only one at a time. The time it would take to quarry the block, therefore, is based on the cubic mass of material to be removed. Divided by the material removal rate, the mass of material is the width multiplied by the length multiplied by the depth. The results follow the metric dimensions presented by Stokes, which are given in cubic centimeters. Meters, feet, and inches are also given. The depth of the channel is open to question. Looking at the photographs, there is a considerable amount of bedrock removed down to the top of the block. It could be argued that other blocks might have been quarried away from its top for other purposes, and therefore this distance could not be considered part of the project. I will estimate, therefore, that the depth of the channel had to have sunk into the bedrock 9 feet for the obelisk and another 2 feet for the undercut. The depth has to include quarrying deep enough that a worker may quarry a channel underneath the block that is wide enough for him to crawl under to chisel away the rock. In the following table, it is assumed that a worker is pounding the granite using a dolerite ball. Stocks estimates that the material removal rate for a dolerite ball is 30 cubic centimeters per hour. While there was no mention of the removal of waste or the replacement of pounders as they became ineffective, it is assumed the material removal rate continues unabated according to Stokes' experimental data. So then he's got a little chart here. The patch in width, length, depth, and cubic mass. And then what that is in feet, inches, meters, and centimeters. Material removal rate per hour per stocks is 30 cubic centimeters. Number of hours for one worker, 50,285.71 hours. Number of days, assuming 10-hour days, 5,028.57 days. Number of years, assuming 320-day year, 15.71 years for one block. So there you go. That's the chart I just read. Now let us analyze the length of time it would take to create an undercut. For the calculation on the undercut, we will use Stokes' removal rate using a hammer and flint chisel. I have switched to this rate on the basis of a reasonable assumption that efficiencies will go down as a worker has to lie on his side without the aid of gravity to impact the surface. Stokes' material removal rate for a hammer and flint chisel was 5 cubic centimeters per hour. Although it challenges the imagination to believe that anyone other than a diminutive person, worker, can effectively chisel a 2-foot by 2.5-foot tunnel underneath the granite, for the sake of argument, I will base my calculations on such an assumption. I will also base my calculations on the assumption that there are workers on both sides of the granite chiseling toward each other, thus having the distance necessary to create the full undercut. And then he gives another chart, which gives all the calculations and then says material removal rate 5 cubic centimeters per hour. Number of hours for one worker 109,800. Number of days, assuming 10-hour days, 10,980. And number of years, assuming 320-day years, 34.31 years. Again, for one block. And I'll let you go ahead and see that. Okay. And as you can see, we're nearing the end of this article. Using constraint analysis, the minimum amount of time just to quarry the stone is 50 years. It is physically impossible to assign more workers to accomplish the task in less time. Workers may come and go to replace tired and sick workers, but at any given time, only one worker can labor away at that patch of granite. The 30 cubic centimeters per hour removal rate does not continue unabated until we have a perfectly flat surface with sharp and square corners. Either we are still left with the task of finishing the product, which in my estimation would conservatively take another decade using the tools that Egyptologists allowed the ancient Egyptians to have in their toolkit. On the basis of Hatshepsut's pair of obelisks are inscriptions that tell us that the pair were quarried and raised into position in a 7-month period. To merely quarry the raw block in such a time would mean that the cutting rate would need to be increased to at least 37 times. Tools capable of such efficiency are not a part of the archaeological record. Along with all previous considerations and claims of geometry and precision, And now, using the Egyptologists' own data, this confirms that the assertions of the Egyptologists are incorrect and that the ancient Egyptians were much more advanced than what we have allowed in the past. And that's the end of that article. So, yeah. So he's assuming 10-hour days. Okay, so you could do a second shift of 10-hour days. Yeah, and the night workers working under the light of torches could have continued it so you'd get 20 hours of work in a day in one particular spot, so you could cut it down. So it's still 25 years to do one rock. I would say that I already didn't believe that it was possible, but that just strengthens my belief that it's not possible to do that. Hey, Super Nambro, how you doing? I just saw that you came in a minute ago. Welcome. I don't know how much of that article you heard, but yeah, the calculations for quarrying one stone obelisk, 50 years. So, yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that. That was pretty straightforward. It was technical data for the most part, and an anecdote about his life. But all right, so the other article I was going to read tonight, I think it's the only one I'm going to read. Let me see. Oh, you know what? I am going to read 2 more articles tonight because that will put us to the end of this section. And then we've got like 4 articles left to finish out the book, which we'll do on Thursday and Sunday. So the final one I'll read is really short. So, all right, behind the pyramid's secret doors. What does this astonishing new evidence reveal about the Great Pyramid's true purpose? So, if you haven't heard about these, there are shafts in the pyramid, and some of them are plugged with stones, and they, I believe, well, we'll find out when we get into it, but I don't remember if they pulled a plug out and then sent a robot in and it ran into another plug, so they stopped, or if they just put it in the shaft and it went up and found a plug and stopped. One of the two, but we'll find out here in just a minute. I'm sure he'll say. On Monday, September 16th, 2002, at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Fox Television in the United States broadcast live from the Giza Plateau in Egypt an exploration of the southern shaft in the Queen's Chamber in the Great Pyramid. Since 1993, when German robotics engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink made his initial exploration of this 8-inch wide, 8-inch square, 220-foot long shaft, millions of Egypt watchers around the world have been waiting for the day when additional explorations would take place and another tantalizing barrier to great knowledge might be removed. So the one I'm thinking of is the first one back in 93. The 2-hour Fox National Geographic / National Geographic extravaganza provided a tortuous prelude to the moment when iRobot's masonry drill bit finally broke through into the space beyond, and the endoscopic camera was inserted into the hole to take a peek at what lay beyond Gantenbrink's door. The build-up to the production explored several ideas on what lies behind this so-called door. Before the show aired, Dr. Zahi Hawass, chairman of Egypt's Supreme Council of the Antiquities, expressed a belief that a book about Khufu would be discovered. Quote, "What this door might hide is very important to know that Khufu wrote a sacred book, and maybe this book is hidden behind this door, or maybe a papyrus roll telling us about building the pyramids," end quote. Hawass's comments were taken further by the Egyptian State Information Service. Quote, Hawass stated that such doors were constructed for religious purposes due to the books found there, such as the gateways, the cavities, and the road which guided the dead to the hereafter and warned them against the dangers they might face. End quote. The German Egyptologist Rainer Stadelmann, who directed the work of Rudolf Gantenbrink in 1993, expressed a belief that the so-called door was a false door for the king's soul to pass through on its way to Osiris, represented by the star Sirius. He believed that the copper fittings were handles that the king would use to lift the door. Robert Bovell, author with Adrian Gilbert of The Orion Mystery, Unlocking the Secrets of the Pyramids, predicted that a statue would be discovered and that the end of the shaft served as a serdab, a narrow chamber commemorating the dead, from which the ancient Egyptians viewed the stars. And here is Gantenbrink's door. Right there. And those dark lines are the copper fixtures they mentioned. John Anthony West, the author of Serpent in the Sky, thought there would be nothing but core masonry behind the door. A caller to the Art Bell show during an interview I had with George Norrie on September 15th identified herself as an Egyptologist and claimed to know what was behind the door. Dismissing my hypothesis on what would be behind the door, she claimed that they would find a space 30 feet long that contained sacred sand. My own hypothesis, which we will discuss in a moment, has changed little since the publication of my book, The Giza Power Plant, in 1998. I resurrected it on my website and discussed it in interviews both prior to and after September 16th. The confidence in Chairman Hawass became noticeably muted as the program drew to a close. He cautioned the viewers that there might be nothing behind the door at all. His prophetic comments became a sickening reality to all of us as the endoscopic camera with its fisheye lens pushed through the hole and a distorted image came into view. There appeared to be nothing there but a rough-looking block a short distance away. With inimitable style and gusto, Dr. Hawass could hardly contain his excitement at the dismal image sent back by the camera. "It's another door," he said with glowing enthusiasm, "with a crack." The old Peggy Lee song played with melancholy in my head. Is that all there is? Hawass's pre-broadcast predictions were downgraded a week later to, quote, "Everything now needs a careful look. We will ask the National Geographic Society to cooperate to reveal more mysteries. After this broadcast, can we expect them to reveal anything but mysteries? After all, it's the mysteries that keep the viewers coming back for more," end quote. On September 23, 2002, news came out of Egypt that the Pyramid Rover team had successfully explored the northern shaft in the Great Pyramid. This shaft, opposite the southern shaft, posed problems for Gantenbrink in 1993. Upuat 2 was unable to navigate around earlier explorers' rods that were jammed in the passage as they attempted to push the rods around a bend in the shaft. The iRobot team had a cunning but simple solution to the problem that Gantenbrink was faced with. They turned the robot 90 degrees and sent it up the shaft, gripping the walls instead of the ceiling and floor. In this manner, it was able to ride over the top of the obstacles. Of the northern shaft, Hawass had an opinion that was beyond all reasonable demands of any craftsman living in any era. Subject to the scrutiny and attention of the world press, the information coming from the chief of the SCA became increasingly unusual. It is an unfortunate position to be in, to be considered an expert and explorer in residence for the National Geographic Society and not have any well thought out answers for a hungry press. Quote, the passage had bends and turns in an apparent attempt by builders to avoid the main chamber, end quote. This could indicate the unexplained passageways. What? This could indicate the unexplained passageways were built after the pyramids were completed and were not part of the original design. Hawass speculated that the passages could be connected to an attempt by Cheops to promote himself as Egypt's sun god. Belief at the time said kings became the god in death. Hawass believes the shafts, which have been chiseled out of the pyramid stone structure, are passages the king will face before he travels to the afterlife. Then 1 week after going before the cameras in his Indiana Jones hat and predicting the discovery of a royal diary of Khufu, Dr. Hawass was again before the press. Quote, this find in the northern shaft, coupled with last week's discovery in the southern shaft, represents the first major new information about the Great Pyramid in more than a century, end quote. Said Zahi Hawass, director of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities. Again, another quote. This is not Raiders of the Lost Ark, end quote. Hawass said, scoffing at the idea that hidden treasure would be found. Okay, so we have another picture. Shaft on the east side of the Great Pyramid. I don't know how much you're going to be able to get from this, but I will show it to you anyway. There we go. So, yeah. Moving on. Hawass proceeded to predict unabashedly that behind the stone block at the end of the northern shaft would be another door. Cue Peggy Lee. Actually, I believe Hawass is correct. Behind the block at the end of the northern shaft, they will discover another space similar to the one at the end of the southern shaft. This time, I believe they will find a shaft that is on the right side of the cavity, perhaps in the floor, but more than likely in the right wall. Compared to Dr. Hawass, as quoted above, I have used more of the Great Pyramid's entire inner design to arrive at my prediction. I have discussed this subject with knowledgeable and staunch believers of the tomb theory, and they insist that it doesn't matter what is found behind the door, it will still support the tomb theory. One conversant commented that even a vertical shaft that goes down into the bedrock would be incorporated into the tomb theory because if the pharaoh wanted a vertical shaft, he could have one. His reason was that Egyptology is not a hard science and does not need to conform to the same standard. Okay. This is inspiring me to write on my own books that I'm working on. Heck yeah. Get to writing, man. Right. I need to get back to my novels. I have a whole series of novels in my head, and I've got the outlines of some of the story, and I need to get back to writing it. Anyway, in the Giza power plant theory, every architectural element in the Great Pyramid is integrally linked. Some features can be analyzed separately, but for the most part, the Queen's Chamber, the King's Chamber, and the Grand Gallery are the principal features that work together in unison, and they cannot be separated from each other when considering a piece of evidence. Get back to it, and soon it will have written itself. That is correct. Just need to get it out and start writing again. But I've been concentrating on writing other stuff, so it's taken away from that. But now that I've been doing some writing, I'm inspired to go back to it. Anyway, uh, the features found in the King's Chamber led me to propose the use of diluted hydrochloric acid in the southern shaft and hydrated zinc in the northern shaft of the Queen's Chamber. The features in the Grand Gallery led me to understand the function of the King's Chamber. The features in the Queen's Chamber indicate that a chemical reaction was taking place there. The hypothesis rises or falls on the evidence found in these areas. For the theory to hold, evidence that is discovered in the future has to support it. Some evidence, such as what will be found behind Gantenbrink's door, can be predicted by what is found in the chamber, the southern shaft and the northern shaft. The power plant will either be vindicated, severely challenged, or even dismissed based on what is revealed. Before the Pyramid rover exploration, I went on record as being fully prepared to admit that I was wrong if a search of the southern shaft did not reveal another shaft or shafts that will be redirected and eventually lead to a point underneath the pyramid. I also predicted that on the back side of the door, the copper fittings would have connections or would continue away from the door to a point underneath the Great Pyramid. Unfortunately, as of now, there have not been any clear images of the backside of the so-called door. This part of the prediction has not been verified. However, the illustration in my book predicted one of the attributes of the door, and the evidence vindicated this prediction. In my illustration, the thickness of the block is given by a scale as 3 inches thick. My measure was arbitrary and based on nothing more than the proposed function of the block. The ultrasonic thickness tester on the Pyramid rover measured the actual thickness and found it to be 3 inches thick. See schematic above. And here is the schematic. He's showing copper cables connected to the block. Theorized vertical shaft leading to a point beneath the Great Pyramid. Yeah, so here we go. The operation of a fluid switch. Pull back a little bit. There we go. Can I turn it? There we go. Operation of a fluid switch. I don't know if you can read that. I'll come in closer so you can see the smaller text. Okay. Like everybody else in the United States, I was watching the video on Fox television. In the top left corner was live, and the bottom left carried the Fox symbol with channel 27. There was really nothing for me to become excited about until a man in Germany uploaded to the Mott message board a high-resolution image that he had taken of the National Geographic program broadcast on Sky Television in Europe. This image seemed to indicate that there was more to be seen in the area that was occluded by the Fox logo. I copied the image into a graphics program and auto-adjusted the levels, which lightened the dark areas. I stared at the screen for what seemed to be eternity at what was revealed. I know that if you stare at something long enough, you might be able to see a face or some other shape, but the rectangular shape in the left corner of the new block became immediately apparent. I then adjusted the levels, curves, and colors to bring more definition to the image and created construction lines 1 and 2, using the bottom corners as guides in order to create a vanishing point. It was my intention to see if the geometry of the rectangular shape on the left side was indeed a true rectangle and parallel with the wall. Striking a line from the vanishing point and bringing it along the side of the rectangular shape, I became confident that I may have indeed discovered the vertical shaft that I had predicted would be there. Interestingly, the line in the floor is also parallel to the walls, which indicates either that the floor is made of 2 blocks or that a groove is cut in the floor. In this enhanced image, the signs of staining on the floor led from the vertical shaft end, which is also square with the walls. It appears that the second door is also notched in this area. Because the chemical flowing in the Queen's chamber did not need to be a great torrent or even of the volume that a normal faucet would produce, replenishing the shaft with fluid would not require a large orifice. The notched corner, as seen in the bottom right corner of the block, would be all that was needed to maintain the fluid level. Moreover, if we look at the size of the vertical shaft behind the door by scale, it is only about 1.5 inches wide and 4 inches long. The exploration of the northern shaft and what was discovered at the end was predictable and without any shadow of a doubt indicates the purpose for these shafts as outlined in the Giza power plant. The image of another door with copper fittings and the subtle difference between these fittings and those at the end of the northern shaft support the hypothesis regarding the chemicals used. The electrodes are affected by different chemicals a different way. In the southern shaft, the action of the dilute hydrochloric acid eroded the copper over time because the upper part of the copper was covered with chemical for a shorter period of time than the lower part. As the fluid was always falling, the lower part of the copper was eroded more than the upper part. This resulted in a taper of the copper and the ultimate failure of the left electrode. In the northern shaft, we see a different effect because this shaft contained a hydrated metal, such as a hydrated zinc. What we see is an electroplating of the left electrode. This is normal and predictable. Considering that electricity flows from cathode to anode, there would be a deposit of zinc on the anode. What we see in the photograph taken by the Pyramid rover is a white substance on the left electrode only. There is no erosion on these electrodes, and the thickness of the metal is considerably less than on those in the southern shaft. The stained limestone is on the left and on the top of the electrode. Studies on this on what causes this effect are still being made. Okay, and there is another picture of the plug in the northern shaft, and you can kind of see what he's talking about with the white on the left electrode. So I'll try to get it in as close as I can. There we go. You can see the left has that white streak down it. Okay. Though Egyptology is not considered to be a hard science, scientific standards should be employed when trying to explain this edifice. Arguments should follow the evidence of the rules of evidence and conform to scientific principles. While Egyptologists may say the tomb theory is unassailable, my view has been that if the tomb theory cannot follow logical scientific arguments and be subject to radical revision when new data emerges, then it fails. These are the standards applied to alternate theorists such as Hancock, Bovell, and myself, so we should expect no less from those who teach and support the accepted view. Moreover, the theory should be predictable. What was discovered behind Gantenbrink's door, though not yet brought into full view, was not predicted by Egyptologists and does nothing to support the theory that this edifice was originally a tomb. Scientific and social progress demands that we all be skeptics and question the accepted mores and theories that have been handed to us. Alternative views need to be discussed. Indeed, they should be welcomed by anyone who is serious about learning what flaws may exist with his or her own ideas. Egyptology should not be immune to these scientific precepts, though its orthodox protectors' awkward attempt to force contradictory data to fit an unsupportable hypothesis gives little hope for change. Okay. Kind of falling apart right there at the last. Oh no, it's longer than I thought. 1, 2, 3, yeah. Okay, well, I've got one more article to get through tonight because that puts us to the end of part 5 of the book and gives us 4 more articles to read to finish it out and um, and move on to the next book. Which I don't know, Super Nambro, if you're still here. I don't know if you voted yet. I put up a poll on Twitter um, for what book to read next or what subject area to go into next. And it was go on with the next in the Forbidden series, which would be either Forbidden Science or Forbidden Religion, uh, or something on Atlantis, something on the Masons slash Templars, or something to do with Jesus and Mary Magdalene. So far, I have gotten one vote for Egypt, or I'm sorry, for Atlantis. So we'll see. It's going to be up for another few days, and we'll see if anybody else votes. But it's looking like Atlantis, and one of the books that is a contender for that is Atlantis and the Kingdom of the Neanderthals. So that could be interesting. But I have lots of other Atlantis books. It is very. I've read at least part of it many years ago, and it is a very interesting book. So we'll see. We'll see how the voting goes. But I'm going to go ahead and try to plow through this last article, and then we'll get on to Tomb Raider after a quick break. Rise of the Tomb Raider. I should be almost done with the game. All right. Article 38, the case for advanced technology in the Great Pyramid. What does the evidence really show about the advancement of its builders? By Marshall Payne. And there's a quote. One of the tragedies of life is the murder of a beautiful theory by a brutal gang of facts. Oh, I love that. The murder of a beautiful theory by a brutal gang of facts. I am going to have to write that down. That is a beautiful quote. And that is by La Rochefoucauld. It's something French. Rochefoucauld. The murder of a beautiful theory by a brutal gang of facts. Oh, God, I want that on a T-shirt. I want that on a T-shirt. I'm going to do it. All right, so here we go. The Khufu, or Cheops, pyramid defies how we depict ancient technology. Over 2 million limestone blocks rise to the height of a 40-story building. Each baseline exceeds 2.5 football fields. Standing on top, an archer cannot clear the base with an arrow. All this comes from what was supposedly an agrarian society 4,500 years ago. And that's not all. The precision and craftsmanship surpass our modern understanding. Occupying an area of 13 acres, the entire bedrock base has been carved to less than an inch out of level. It is oriented within a tiny fraction of a degree from the cardinal points. Outer casing stones and inner granite blocks fit with such precision that a razor blade cannot be inserted between them. Blocks weighing as much as 70 tons, about what a railroad locomotive weighs, have been lifted to the height of a 10-story building and mated to the next block with wondrous precision. How did they do these things? We don't know. Just a few generations before Khufu, there were no pyramids. Where did the technology come from? We have no answers. Any method of construction suggested to date for this pyramid does not satisfy the accepted standards of technology, but the reality is that the pyramid is real, and regardless of how they built it, they built it. Egyptians built pyramids for another 1,000 years, but today most of those are unrecognizable rubble. Only the older ones are intact, which argues against the assumption of accrued knowledge. By whatever technological means these older ones were built, the Egyptians themselves somehow lost that technology. More intriguing is why they were built in the first place. In spite of the fact that no body or funerary object dating to the same time that the Fourth Dynasty pyramids were built has ever been found in any of them, Orthodox Egyptology vehemently asserts that all pyramids are tombs, and only tombs, built to house the bodies of pharaohs. Later pyramids had funerary connotations, but no bodies. Egyptology's explanation of grave robbers does not address the absence of any evidence of robbers and fails to explain how purported robbers could bypass the barriers constructed to prohibit intrusion. Perhaps funerary considerations introduced after the Fourth Dynasty were connected to the marked degeneration in construction quality. So let's test the tombs-only conviction with just one of the pyramid's unique design features. And in case you want to see it, here's a picture of the Great Pyramid of Giza, which would be Cheops or Khufu. Which we all know what they look like, but who doesn't want to see a picture of the Great Pyramid any time they get a chance? The descending passage is roughly 350 feet long, of which about 150 feet is through masonry and another 200 feet is through bedrock. A century ago, Sir Flinders Petrie, known as the granddaddy of Near East archaeology, measured the descending passage. To show his adeptness for precision, he measured the pyramid's perimeter by triangulation, as the base was covered with rubble. He calculated it to be 3,022.93 feet. 25 years later, the Egyptian government hired a professional surveyor after the rubble had been cleared away, and by traditional surveying techniques, found it to be 3,023.14 feet. Petrie was off by 2.5 inches in 3,000 feet, off by 0.007%. The straightness of the passage and the flatness of its ceiling and sides intrigued his penchant for precision. Because the floor had been so damaged, he didn't consider it. The passage is about 4 feet high by 3.5 feet wide and descends at an angle of 26 degrees. It is oriented due north and today is aligned to Polaris. Petrie determined that, quote, the average error of straightness in the built part of the passage is only 1/50th of an inch, an amazingly minute amount in a length of 150 feet. Including the whole passage, the error is under 1/8 of an inch on the sides and 3/10 of an inch on the roof, in the whole length of 350 feet, end quote. How on earth did they construct this straightness, this optical precision on the scale of a football field? They didn't have lasers. Walk through the steps of possible construction methods. How could such precision have been derived? Answer: we don't know. They used some sort of technology and or tools we simply don't know about. But what do we know using our own technology is that, or what we do know using our own technology, is that they could not have done this by accident. And obviously, no matter how they did it, it required a huge effort. Thus, one thing now is absolutely clear. They didn't go through such extreme effort for precision in the passage to carry a body through one time. By any kind of rationale, this should put the tomb-only notion to rest. This information has been available for a century. It is suggested that the tomb-only theory has persisted because the curriculum for Egyptology has not included fundamental sciences and mathematics and therefore does not provide the foundation to evaluate such elementary technical matters. Very true. Not much science in Egyptology. Um, so what, then, could be the pyramid's purpose? There may be several, but a good bet for at least one use for the descending passage is as an observatory. Astronomy is the oldest discipline of science, and the ancients are known to have been astute astronomers. Great deeds by the ancients were motivated by their respective religions, and their religions were derived from astronomy. To them, studying the heavens was not merely a scientific effort. Their immortality depended on it. Along with the measurable movements of the sun, moon, planets, and stars, many scholars recognize that the ancients knew about the precession of the equinoxes. Like a top that circles slowly while spinning rapidly around its central axis, Earth makes the slow circle of a precession at about 1 degree every 22 years, or a complete circle once every 26,000 years, while spinning around its axis once every 24 hours, usually attributed to Hipparchus, 150 BCE. The knowledge of this moving of the vault of the heavens is demonstrated by the ancients far older than Hipparchus, and their religions reflected this knowledge. Citing from the bottom of the descending passage, the upper opening subtends an angle of just over half a degree. It would take a span of 36 years for an observer to follow any star close to the true pole, i.e. today's Polaris, as it enters the opening from the left and continues to the right until it disappears. Thus 72 years would equal 1 degree of a precession, and 360 times that would yield a precession cycle of just under 26,000 years. It is well known that Egypt's ancients had the ability to deal with such mathematics. So, considering the religion and astronomy, the precision in design of the descending chamber as an observatory seems more credible than the idea that it had been designed to carry a body through it once, and attributing such precision to happenstance. Another purpose for the Khufu pyramid, it is the largest and thereby might well epitomize the ancients' technology, could be to serve as a monument to preserve knowledge, something of a time capsule. A large number of scholars outside of Egyptology believe it preserves dimensions of our planet, whereby the base perimeter is equal to 1/2 of a degree of equatorial longitude. Does it? And he does the calculations here. Perimeter 3,023.14 feet equals half a minute. 6,046.28 feet equals 1 minute. 362,776.8 feet equals 1 degree. So 68.7077 miles equals 1 degree. 360 degrees equals 24,734.78 miles. If you stand on the equator and walk due north to 3,023.14 feet, the theory is that you've walked 1/2 of 1 minute of longitude. The Earth's longitude would then equal 24,735 miles. Satellite measurement is 24,860 miles at a difference of 125 miles. This is accuracy of 99.5%. Egyptology calls this coincidence, and that is certainly possible. But if the theory has merit, then the only other dimension of a sphere, its radius, would have as its counterpart the pyramid's height. If such proves out, the theory would indeed have merit. But does it? The height of the Khufu pyramid was 480.7 feet. Various measurements differ minutely, but not enough to affect the theory. and that's because of the lack of capping stone, or not the capstone and the casing stones. They're estimating based on the angles how tall it would actually be, so they could be off by a little bit. Using formula above, 480.7 feet times 2 times 60 times 360 equals 3,933 miles. This computes to a polar radius of the Earth of 3,933 miles, which compared to the satellite's measurement of 3,960 miles yields a difference of 27 miles, or an accuracy of 99.3%. 99.5%. 99.5%, 99.3%. I don't know what he's saying there. The mathematics of engineering does not allow such accuracy to be discussed as coincidence. Okay. How could the ancient Egyptians have derived these measurements? Again, look to astronomy. The Secrets of the Great Pyramid by Peter Tompkins. There are many other features of the pyramid. Oh, we are in a commercial. Okay, so I know I was just staring at the screen while you were on break, but I didn't want to keep reading while you can't hear me. So, there are many other features of the pyramid for which we have no explanations. So this knowledge is but one example of what they knew and what we've only known for a few hundred years. But there stands the pyramid. Then comes the question of the pyramid as a scale of the Earth's dimensions. Why such a big scale? Why not a pyramid half the size? A dramatic reduction of work to attain and preserve the same information. A hint comes from an unexpected discipline, mythology. The highly esteemed scholar Joseph Campbell, writing about myths of disparate cultures, Icelandic, Babylonian, Sumerian, Egyptian, and others, including biblical scripture, in his book The Masks of God, Occidental Mythology, found the number 43,200, or its direct multiple or derivative. In fact, he traced this number back to Neolithic times. This engendered in him what he called ecstatic panic, in that the supposed independent reoccurrence of this number, he reasoned, represented some relationship to cosmic rhythm, perhaps even a universal constant. Remember the Khufu pyramid scale, 2 times 60 times 360 equals 43,200? Professor Campbell's ecstatic panic might have been too much for him had he known this. Could this number in some way have been used by the builders to determine the pyramid's dimensions? Bottom line, 1. The notion that the pyramids were only tombs is disproved. That they were tombs at all has never been proved, even though the younger ones, not the older ones, had funerary characteristics. 2. The ancients demonstrated technology far exceeding what's been credited to them, far exceeding a simple mausoleum, reaching out with accuracy and methodology unexplained today. Where did this technology come from? We don't know. But they had it, and then they lost it. And rising above the Giza Plateau is the most massive monument to that loss, the Great Khufu Pyramid, the oldest and only survivor of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And there you go. So I am going to have to see, I may have the Masks of God Occidental Mythology. If I do, it's definitely getting added to the list. I also really want that quote. So, that is it for this reading session. Lots to think about in those articles. But that leads us into part 6, the final part of this book. new models to ponder. And these are going to be, well, we'll see. The first one looks like it might be about aliens, artifacts in space. I think I know what they may be talking about there. The pulsar mystery. Yes, that's the quote I want. I want it on a t-shirt. The physicist as mystic. So will be the last article. And that leads us to the end of the entire book. Awesome. Oh, there's even... all the references are written out in all of these. Cool. And some bios on the contributors. Cool. Very, very cool. But yeah, we will leave off there and get back to it on Thursday for 2 of those articles. Finish up on Sunday. And by Sunday, I hope to know exactly what book I'm going to be jumping into. Like I said, so far it looks like it's going to be an Atlantis book. So we'll see. But we'll leave it there. Take a quick break, and I will be back for Rise of the Tomb Raider in another 15 minutes, say. It's 10:45, so start at 11. See you then.